Yep. No, not at all. I mean,
welcome everybody. We're going to have very light topic today, saving our planet. So I'm going to be moderating. My name is Juhani. I'm not going to be talking very much, I think. I don't really know much about the things these gentlemen do. To prefix a little bit our discussion here, we're not climate scientists, so we're not here to discuss if climate science or if climate change is real. The climate disaster is real, and it's caused by us as humans. We need to solve all the problems. We're not here to solve just the big problems. We're going to be hearing from these guys what we all here can do, hopefully, and come out, leave the room motivated to do something ourselves. Let's start with a round of intros, so we hear from everybody who's who and where they work for, a little bit angle what you're kind of discussing, and then we can jump into things.
Thanks. Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you for having me. I am not an active software engineer anymore, but I used to code almost my entire life. 5 years ago, I decided to create a non-profit organization called the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance that nobody can remember. So SDIA is what you can remember. And we are now a team of 16 people trying to figure out how to create a sustainable digital economy, which I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about.
Hey everyone, I'm Fred. I work at Klima with Android. Yeah, we're also a small startup trying to empower everyone to take effective climate action by estimating, reducing, and offsetting your personal carbon footprint. I'm from Brazil. I'm based in Berlin. Been here for 3 years, and looking forward to talk about this topic, especially from the perspective of the individual action, which is what we try to focus on right now.
all right, thank you, Fred. Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Jörn. I work at Ecosia. Ecosia is a not-for-profit business that focuses on climate action and actually dedicates 100% of its profits for climate action. It's mainly about planting trees, so 80% of the profits go into planting trees, and the rest goes into different kinds of like landscape restoration and other means to help fight climate crisis. I'm there in the mobile team, so I'm helping to develop both our apps on the Android and on the iOS side. And yeah, I'm very glad to be here and talk with the other folks and give some insights how we do it at Ecosia, and also what my personal opinion might be, how everyone else could contribute to take climate action.
Fantastic. So I thought we would start from ourselves. What can we individuals do? So if we can go around, or if you have opinions, just jump in. Let's start from very close to ourselves. As software engineers, what is the thing we can do in our own daily lives to do something differently that we don't do now?
Yeah, maybe I can start. For me personally, it all comes down to your mindset. So if you really shape your own mindset and you have the feeling, okay, I take decisions every day as a developer, and actually my decisions have an impact somehow close to myself at the other side of the globe, but actually you can have an impact with your decisions, and you always have options. So, I mean, that sounds broad, but let me make it a bit tangible. So you can think of, okay, how often do I actually need to run my integration tests? How often do I need to run my unit tests? I know they actually run in some data center somewhere around the world, but what kind of energy source is this running on? So is it run on green energy? Is it run on fossil fuels? So I mean, just by asking these questions yourself, or asking these questions your line manager or your CTO, you can already raise awareness in your company for yourself. And it can also I think really can come down to really small impact. So if you write energy effective code, which is good for the battery life of your users, in the very high scale, if you have millions of users, it has an effect on how the energy consumption might be. So it's really these small things that I think can add up to a bigger picture. Maybe some others have some more examples?
Yeah, one thing I only realized, I guess, a few months before I joined Klima was that as a software developer, I never really saw myself involved in these questions, even though everyone is. And one thing that is really interesting right now is to see that there are more and more opportunities to contribute to this kind of business, either non-profit for profit where climate action and the environment is a big centerpiece of it. And sometimes you're really focused on the more like usual industry cases where it's the companies we're used to, where profit is really the main focus of it. And the more and more you see other new interesting opportunities where it's a bit different. And as a software engineer, it's just nice to have the vision that you can actually, not only in terms of the little details behind your job, but your job can actually revolve around something that is like this, or maybe not your main job, but it can be your side hustle or a little bit of freelancing, a little bit of contribution that you can do. So not only whether the systems we're running or whether it's sustainable, not only that, but your actual main function as a software developer can actually be also focused on an initiative that makes a lot of sense when it comes to climate change and the planet. And yeah, just wanted to bring that up because it's something that it took me a while to realize that, yeah, it is a possibility to do something like this as a software engineer.
Yeah, great points. I completely agree with you guys. I think there's two aspects that are quite interesting, right? So there's what you do as a developer and which companies you work. Like you two made a very obvious choice. So you want to direct your engineering talent towards making the world a better place to a certain extent. But then I want you to all realize maybe there's a second aspect, and that is basically the entire world is betting that software will basically solve climate change right now. I don't know if you're aware of this. Every political discussion, every industry, everybody's saying we are going to solve everything with software. And then you have to start asking the question, so what is then the impact of software, right? Because if we digitalize everything, if we slap a sensor on every single parking spot in Berlin, right? We're talking about maybe like 100 million sensors. How many resources are embedded into those sensors? Where do they come from? How much CO2 does that generate? How much energy does that consume? And that's a question where today we're never really asked. We just make more software. And it's not your fault. I'm not, I'm a software engineer myself, but it's time that we ask the question, what's the effect of digitalizing everything? And what's the consequence of that, right? And because that's what we can contribute. We can use software to make the world a better place, but we also can be smarter than the generations before us and say, well, before we scale this to be the biggest industry in the world, let's make sure that it's sustainable by design. And I think that's the responsibility we have as a software engineering community at the end of the day.
So you talk about asking questions. Where do we find these answers? So a lot of these things, what we talk about here, we know we need to do something, but we don't quite understand the impact. Where do we go and find answers for these questions?
That's a fantastic question. Because I've spent the last 3 years trying to find these answers, right? And there's a fundamental problem, and it's a bit ironic always. Software is also often about data, right? So we are the data people. Yet there's no data whatsoever on any of this. People can't even agree on how much energy the data centers that power most of the internet are consuming. It can be 2% of global power consumption, up to 15%. Does it include crypto mining? Yes or no? Nobody knows, right? There's no data. And it's become a sport of mine to keep asking, especially big cloud providers, hey, how much power are you consuming? And the answer I get is, well, I can't tell you that, but I can say it's 100% green electricity. And I'm like, dude, I just need absolute numbers, right? I want to know how big it is. And that is honestly one of the points that I hope you can all encourage the cloud providers that you use or the partners that you have to be transparent with the underlying resource, so materials, metals, raw minerals, but also energy consumption. Because at the moment, organizations like us, we are basically, I get this question all the time from politics, how much energy does the internet consume? I'm like, I have no idea. There's no data. I can ask all my software engineering friends, they will be like, well, it's running on 400 VMs on Google Cloud. That doesn't help. So I need kilowatt hours, and to answer your question, I have no answers. It's a bit sad, I have to say.
Yeah, maybe I can second that. I mean, what Max just said, I think transparency is key, that we somehow have transparency about the services that we use, the data centers, where our services are run, what are the companies actually doing with their profits that we work together with, what is our own company doing with the profits that we're having. It's like more about real getting transparent insights into like the whole chain from writing our code, from deploying it to like the impact that our customers might have with our products or with our services on the environment. And like it starts right now to put figures on it. So we have like these CO2 equivalents, and we try to like put numbers on things, and it's actually a good start because things that get measured, it gets changed eventually. So when we don't have these numbers, it's hard to change it. Still, it's also tricky sometimes to look at these numbers because you don't know what's part of the equation, what's not. So that makes it even trickier. So it's a really complex topic, but transparency is a good start to my mind. So like really ask these questions that Max just proposed, like ask, as I just repeat myself, your CTO about it, or ask your service providers, your infrastructure providers about it, and then you can make an eloquent decision afterwards and say, okay, I want to continue to work with you, or I don't want to because I don't like that you run a data center in West Virginia which is only powered by coal mines. So at Ecosia we did this. So we asked Amazon actually, because we have two main clusters. So we are a search engine and we operate mainly in the US market and in Europe. And we have a European data center which is in Frankfurt, and we know it's the German electricity mix here, and it's like high rate of green energy. And in the US it was actually running in West Virginia, and it's like an old coal area. So we decided, okay, that's not really what we want. So we transferred our cluster to Canada, actually. So there's another AWS cluster or data center where you can run your cluster, and this is fully run on green energy. So it was a tricky process, and it was also not easy for us because many stakeholders were involved, and it was a bit complicated also here and there. But just to ask this question starts the process. And I think this is somehow starting the process at some point will result in more transparency and more sophisticated decision making in the end, to my mind.
Maybe. Can I just, there's something really important in there. And I want you all to realize, again, I hang out a lot with data center people, which is a bit, you would think they're more, let's say, it's more interesting, but they're not very exciting. In that sense, they love diesel generators, that's the thing. The bigger the diesel generator, the hotter the data center. And they love to talk about cooling systems and things like this. And ultimately, I'm probably the only software engineer in the entire European data center community, to be fair. And every single time I say, hey, why don't you change this? Why don't you? Well, you don't need so much redundancy on the physical level. I just put a software load balancer in front. Then if your data center fails, it just goes to another one. And they always say, no, we can't do any of this because the software engineers, they want it like this. And I'm like, when was the last time you asked them? Because a lot of the architecture that how data centers are built for banks. You're running your WordPress site on a data center that runs 4 sets of diesel generators, 4 sets of backup batteries, 2 redundant power feeds. It's bank-level security. Some of these data centers can withstand a rocket strike. And then I'm like, does my mom's WordPress blog with cooking recipes need to run on that kind of infrastructure? No, it doesn't, yes. Right? But they think all software is like as critical as an SAP ERP system for shopping mall, I don't know. And it's just not the case. And we need to educate the infrastructure because, to put it in scale, Microsoft is building a new hyperscale facility in Sweden, luckily in Sweden. It's 400 megawatt of size, 16 soccer fields. 400 megawatts, that's, I think, a tenth of the power consumption of the city of Berlin. That's just one. And they're building that because you are building applications. We are building applications. And we need to tell them, guys, maybe you can do it in a more sustainable way because I don't need A, B, and C. I don't need it to be as redundant. Sorry, I stop. I get very emotional about this. I just need your help. So I feel very lonely talking to data.
So it's about modesty, you say. I mean, how do you educate software developer to be modest and say, okay, the low bandwidth model is enough for me? So
yeah, or split. You know, every application has a background worker. Like you have a crawler and you have your front end, and the front end, of course, needs to be available. But the image compression, can that run maybe 2 hours later? It doesn't really matter, right? We've all built architectures like this. And that's all I'm asking, like to tell the data centers there is not just one workload. It's a bit different. That's it. Sorry.
That's all right. We touched already a little bit this one. We went from the personal mindset towards a little bit how companies work. Do you have tips for somebody who works in a software company or product company, has nothing to do with the environment? What is the impact of the grassroots developer can do in their company to kind of raise the awareness or do take some real action other than choosing data centers?
I think maybe we can also take a bigger step back and talk a little bit about not only as software developers, but also as individuals in general, because I think it's a very heated debate whether individual impact really makes a difference or not. When we're talking about a company, it's a bit easier to understand because you can think of a bigger infrastructure, a lot of energy being wasted. But when it comes to one individual, does it really make a difference to try to do something about the climate change, which is this huge issue that we are facing? And yeah, that's probably one of the topics I'm most passionate about because it's a very heated debate, and a lot of people like to hug the argument that it's the big corporations' fault. They're the ones responsible for most of the emissions, and so there's nothing I can do. I can't do anything about it. It's up to them to change their ways. And yes, absolutely, they have a super huge responsibility when it comes to their emissions. But saying that we can't do anything about it just because of that is just it's not quite the right approach. Big companies are not emitting a lot of carbon because they're evil or because they want to destroy our planet. They're doing it because they're just trying to maximize their profits, and that's part of the game. So if we want to do something about it, we need to change the rules of the game. And that actually starts with us as an individual, because what we can do is vote in the right people to put the right people there where they need to be to make the change happen. So that's number one thing we can do as an individual. I don't know if I'm straying a little bit too far from the initial topic, but I think it's too relevant for the panel. Number two would be to actually, very close to that, just nudge more people to vote. So it's also kind of voting. By talking about it like we're doing here right now, this is super relevant. Or by going to protests like we did very recently in Berlin. And by just spreading the word. And another thing individuals can do that do make a big difference is also voting, surprise, but with your money. So whenever you buy a product, whether if you decide to go with a more sustainable product, you're sending a small signal to the market. And if enough people send that same signal, the market is going to change. It's just like voting. If enough people do, something's going to happen. And so if you look at, for instance, why these large fast food chains have like vegan options right now, for instance, do you think it's because they're worried about our planet or because they want to be nice to vegans? No, it's because they're still maximizing their profits, and they're doing that because they know there's a market, and there's a market because enough people send that signal. So it does make a difference, and it's clear. But I'm just an Android developer. I don't want you to take my word on this extremely complex topic. So I just want to throw another thing on the table, which is this recent leak from IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they're basically this authority when it comes to scientific knowledge on climate change. And it's one of the most reliable sources of information you can get on the topic. And it's, for the first time, it officially said that, yes, individual contribution is necessary and needs to happen, basically. So the bottom line is individual action is a thing. And now I stop too, because I also get a bit emotional.
I want a second on
Oh,
yeah, one of applause was great speech. I really like the idea that you said we have votes. So I mean, of course, we live in a democracy. We are happy, especially here in Germany, to have votes, and we vote in the supermarket. But I think especially also we as developers, we have another vote or another election, and that is choosing the company that you work for. I mean, it's a high demand for skilled developers out there, and I mean, nearly everyone is hiring, and you probably know your mailboxes are spilling over from emails from recruiters these days. And you can choose actually which company you would like to work for. Of course, there are many aspects to the decision. So of course you want to have some cool product that you want to work on. You want to have the latest technology. So we had lots of Jetpack Compose and other cool things that you want to probably work with. But you can also consider, okay, what's actually the business model behind the company, or what's actually the legal model behind the company. So is it like a B Corp that is putting some parts of the profit into climate action, or is it only making individuals rich so they can fly to the moon or wherever? So I mean, you have this vote as developers. You can, where you put your work, these companies will thrive, and where you put your creativity and your energy. So, and this came down to me when I was like, I don't know, traveling South America 2 years ago, and it really came onto me that I want to dedicate my major skills that I have as a software developer towards this goal, and I'm not really convenient anymore making individuals rich just for the sake of profit. I mean, we are still profit-oriented, and I mean, the world runs like this, but I think we have this vote, and I like the idea of like empowering also the people, empowering us as developers, that we can make a change with where to focus our energy.
So these two comments, they touch an interesting area, which is, profit. Can we make climate change or climate protection profitable for companies? Working for companies who do that makes it profitable. Buying products that are green makes it profitable. Are these the only tools, or can we harness the human greed that drives our planet to make the planet better?
I mean, maybe because I just talked about, I have one quote that I read in a book. I can't recall really the name. I'm really bad with names. But it was like, as long as a dead tree has a higher price in the market than a living one, people will cut down the tree and make wood from it. And same accounts to, as long as a dead whale can be sold on a market, it might be killed and might not stay alive. So it's putting a price on things. So, or if you say, okay, profit is like the overall holy grail that we are looking for, then it will be hard if you only are looking for profit. So there are these companies that have accounted this, and they know, okay, we dedicate many of our profits or all of our profits towards it, and they are not for profit or non-profit or other legal forms of companies that go in that direction. And I think it's an important way, and there are also new legal forms that are accomplished right now. So also Ecosia, we are on legal terms, we are GmbH, so it's a German term. So we are basically a for-profit or not-for-profit organization, but there's also a thing that is called steward ownership. And that basically means that the company can never be sold and it's dedicated to its purpose. So our founder some years ago gave all away his shares to the Purpose Foundation, and by that the essence of Ecosia and the essence of the company cannot be changed anymore. So we can never be bought by any hedge fund, and we cannot be bought by any investors that will pivot and make us an evil corp at some point. So, and that's really, that makes me happy in a way that I know, okay, my ambition and my focus really goes in the right direction, and it will stay like this. So, and I think when these kind of companies keep evolving, that will be another step in the right direction, and we do not only focus on profits itself.
Yeah, I'm currently in between two nonprofits, and Klima is not a nonprofit, so I also want to give the other perspective, which is also very interesting. I obviously have amazing, great respect for these kind of nonprofit, because it's really it really helps everyone to trust their company, because it's clearly there's nothing dark behind it. But there's also the more pragmatic approach to it, which is, yes, I wish profit wasn't really the focus of everything, but it unfortunately most of the time is in our society. So the other perspective is that we also understand that climate change is an urgent problem that requires an emergent solution, and we need to scale and move as fast as we can. And the way to maximize the impact is to put money on it. So that's the pragmatic perspective. We want to maximize our impact. Putting money on it will help us do that, so we'll take it. But obviously at Klima, we're actually on our way to be a B Corporation certified, which means we would be something in between. B Corporation is the certification given by a non-profit to profit companies based on social and environmental score and performance. So it's basically a way, it's basically, if you're a B Corp, you're balancing profit and purpose. And it's basically a way to make sure that, to certify and to verify that you are for profit, but you still have a significant social and economic and environmental impact. So it's, there's no perfect world, basically. And it's interesting to see that we can use the money for good. And it's also interesting to see, okay, but how can a company that is fighting climate change profit? How can we take profit out of it? Because if there's a dark way on how the profit's going to come, it's also a bit weird. So it's also the topic that is worth exploring. And at Klima, we are at a very early stage, so I can't really give any specifics from Klima. But there's this other company that recently was released on Canada and the US, which is called Carbon Neutral Club, which is a very similar approach. You calculate your footprint, and then you can offset your footprint with them through carbon offsetting projects. And then they give you discounts at sustainable brands. So the premise is that when you have a product like that, you have the attention of this very specific public, which is like people like us interested in the topic and probably willing to spend money to, to buy the product that is more sustainable, to spend money to help with the cause. So you can basically connect these people with the right brands, and that's where you take the profit. And if you think about it, it's actually a nice way to profiting because, I mean, at least personally, I would like an app to tell me what brands I can trust and that are aligned with the mission of the company that I'm giving my money to. So that's basically the wrap up.
Yeah, maybe I can add something to that. I generally agree with both of you. I think it's especially difficult, but I will try to add something more controversial in that sense. I think sometimes we have to choose our battles, right? And at the moment we have a few problems on this planet that need to be solved, right? One of them is climate change. Another one is, in my opinion, and if we talk about profit, we talk about capitalism. And there's a lot of people that think that capitalism has reached its peak and we need to get rid of it. But I had a lot of arguments with a lot of my friends and smart people, and I came to the conclusion that at the moment I would focus on solving climate change because I have 2 kids. That has the biggest impact for them. And if I have to do that within the profit maximization principle of capitalism, then so be it. And you're right to a certain extent that if a company like Ecoasia, why shouldn't they profit? Because if they do something that's measurably getting us closer to solving climate change, then why not? If anybody should profit, then companies like that. What we could argue about is, does a hedge fund manager need to get 100 million bonus? That's a different equation. But if somebody works towards accomplishing progress and actually makes that progress, then I believe they also can have some profit. I actually don't mind. And at the moment, I think we should all focus on what can we do to solve climate change? What can we change? How can society change? How can industries change? And then if there is a reward in it for people, will just make it go faster. And go faster is what I personally believe is necessary right now. Yeah. And I also wanted to say from earlier, I agree with the personal choice point. That's why 3 years ago I stopped being a developer, because I felt like I can only do so much with code, working for this company or this company or this company. I eventually had to do something and also talk a little bit more and educate people, because I felt like we are a very closed community sometimes, and there's so much attached to us, and it's important that we explain to people how software actually works. I think that helps.
Cool. For the audience, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So there's 2 microphones. So if you have some things you want to bring up, you can line up there while we're talking about the next topic. So community, you mentioned that. So one of the things about Android is community. We all here, most of us are part of some GDG or some other meetup group. We are a very tight community, even compared to other technical areas. Is there something we can do in our community work? Can we, other than advocating, what can we do there?
I think we can set the example. Having this space here within this event was super awesome, and I wasn't expecting it at all. You're like, it's a DroidCon, why are we talking about climate change? Well, because it's extremely relevant right now. So this is already something that is super cool, and I can see that happening more often and in other events. And I think it was great that we set the example here in Berlin right after the climate strike. And yeah, this is great. That's what came from the top of my head. I need to think a bit more. So
yeah, I mean, forming communities, that's in us, we want to be surrounded with people that share the same goals or that share the same values, and like to build up a community around some common ground feels great. I mean, you do it here at DroidCon and have this great community event, and it really felt great to be among people that have similar passions, and it just feels great. And if you can channel this in other directions, like fighting climate change, I mean, You see the protests going on that are being organized. When you are there and you are among the people, you really feel the energy, and at some point you see there is progress coming through this. And I mean, we can all leverage technologies to form communities. I guess every one of us is in some form of community or social media out there, and we just have to channel this and progress on this front, and take energy from there to fight this like overwhelming, huge threat that is like there. And it also helps you like to fight anxiety. So I'm also working in a environment, in a company where we are very sensitive to like fighting anxieties, because many people have anxieties when you have this overwhelming threat. And I mean, there are catastrophes happening all around the world, and you see this. It really helps you when you are among people where you can share your thoughts and where you actually then can say, okay, but we try to do our best. We are not sure if we will save the planet. I mean, saving the planet is like a really big word and a really big burden that we put upon ourselves, but there's still a chance we can do it. So in a community. So coming back to the
I think that
buzzwording here, sorry.
I think that you're both right. I think, in my opinion, I've always felt like the software community is one of the most powerful in the world to drive change, because if you think about it, there's no other industry that has something like open source, where we decided, patents suck, let's just get rid of patents. Let's make software open and available to everybody, and let's collaboratively maintain it. I think about it, there's no other industry that has done that, right? And it's a testament of how good we are at coming together and changing things we don't like. And so when it comes to climate change and when it comes to software and its relation to climate change, we talked about transparency earlier, so making choices and demanding from your suppliers or from the people that you work with, like, hey, can you tell me how much energy this is consuming so that I can optimize maybe what I'm doing, is a good idea. But I think generally just talking about what the software community can do about this problem that we talk about, I think that's a great first step. And there's a lot of power and momentum and getting shit done attitude in the software world, and I think that's what's needed to solve climate change.
Let me be the downer on this very uplifting thing. We also ruined the planet by creating social networks and destroyed our democracy, and the climate change information and misinformation in some social media platforms is rampant, right? From our software developer, we can all say, well, let's not work for Facebook, but that's not really an answer to this question. But is there something we can do about misinformation?
I mean, that's an inherent problem of social networks plus capitalism, because you have, I mean, this debate has been there out there, but I mean, you have to ask yourself who's actually the customer of these social networks. I mean, probably you have seen the Netflix documentary, and I don't want to like take only information from there, but actually we, as users of social networks, we are users, but the customer is like the marketing industry. It's like ads that are displayed there, and therefore algorithm and engineers optimize for their real clients, and their clients are the people that pay the bills in the end, and the bills are paid for displaying ads over there. And because of this inherent mechanism, they optimize for reaction, how long you stay in, and emotions keep us in these social networks, and we react on reactions, and we react on very heated information, I would say. And I don't know how to solve this. I'm just stating this. That's one problem of social media, that it has this inherent mechanism, these algorithms that optimize for this mechanism of selling our attention to advertisers. And it would be great if we would have some kind of Wikipedia for social networks, so that it's a foundation that is not interested in profit and builds such a social network. So maybe one of you wants to start. I would be happy to join. Or I think there are also some out there, but they have a hard time competing with the social networks out there. But still a chance. So,
and misinformation is another huge issue that is not easy to tackle, and there's no single solution that we can just point at to. And I think it's also a little bit similar in a way that we also need a bigger systemic change, so they can't still stick to the mechanisms you mentioned. So again, we need to vote on the right people to make the changes we need, so these companies can't continue exploiting us through the misinformation. Otherwise, it's hard to find a proper solution to it.
Yeah. I think maybe I can add some insight to this. That's maybe interesting. So ultimately, it's a business model problem, right? As long as you allow people to basically, if I'm allowed to install cameras in this room, track your movements, and then sell that tracking data to somebody else, as long as that business model is allowed to exist, it will be exploited by certain people that are interested in this kind of extraction. And there is actually a lot of the insight that I wanted to give you is that. So to me, it's not a technology problem, it's really a business model problem. And when it's a business model problem, to me, it's the role of the government to fix that. And I do a lot of work in Brussels and the EU. Again, I'm the youngest there. I'm the only software engineer. It's always very funny. And then they explain to me how digitalization works. It's also very funny. And you have, of course, laws to make misinformation and also these business models go away. And let's say 3 iterations of this paper, it's most of the time like 100 pages, and all of a sudden everything that was, let's say, about restricting that has disappeared. And you wonder why. And then you go into the room with the people that support this policy making, and you have 100 lobbyists from Facebook there, you have 100 lobbyists from Google there. And what pisses me off sometimes is that I'm the only software engineer there. There's no counter movement. Let's say from people who maybe from the software community, but even beyond, there's just nobody else there. So you can't even blame them that they always win, because there's no counterbalance. We talk about it here on stage, but ultimately you got to go there. You got to go, and everybody can go. If you're a citizen of the EU, you can go to Brussels and you can complain. You can talk to them. You can attend any meeting, workshop you want. You just have to say, I want to be at the table. And we need to organize a bit more, I think. Yeah, if you want to organize, come to me, then I'll help you. But just maybe some insight on that.
Cool. Let's take a question there.
Hi. I have a question, or more like a critique to our whole industry. If we look at our industry, we have to admit that we are very on top. So we have like agriculture on the bottom, people who build houses, people who do services for other people, and on the very top, basing on this all, our industry sits. And if we look through our workplaces, or if I look through my workplace, I see a lot of things like always top technology, furniture with changeable tables, or a high-tech coffee machine, for example, or even a fruit basket that's always there. And all those things we need, all those things consume energy and resources and materials to give us the legitimation of doing our job like we are going to do it. And if I now ask myself, is it possible, is it even possible for me to give back more with my work than I consume, to just exist with all the things, programming, setting up servers, doing this digitalization? This question of can I save the planet becomes pretty soon very existential. And then I ask myself how to handle this for myself, or how to tell other people, well, maybe it isn't even possible for us to do this like we are going to do it. And the whole concept, yeah, what is the point then? So, but my question is, when it comes to this point, are we going to say, yeah, well, technology is bad for environment, we skip it? Or do we still try to find a solution, because we need a lot to get to a point where we can even think about building a computer and building software for a computer and maximizing the quality?
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think it's a great statement. I think I think the technology sector, especially what you mentioned also about the office equipment and things like this. I think ultimately we must realize that everything comes with resource and energy consumption, also software. It doesn't feel like that because you don't see the data center, you don't necessarily see all the phones, right? But when we talk about, for example, great number to maybe back this up as well is electronic waste. On that I have numbers. It increased 5%. Last week was the World Electronic Waste Day. Electronic waste increased by 5% again, which is a bit silly, given that we know that we should have less electronic waste. And to put it in perspective, the amount of electronic waste that humanity generates per year weighs more than the Chinese wall per year, right? And that's also driven by all of us buying the latest phone every year, buying a new screen, having everything always the latest and greatest. And to be honest, Intel chips haven't changed for about 5 years. Like if you buy a new laptop today, it's probably almost the same speed as 3 years ago. And these things we need to talk about, right? Everything comes with resource and energy consumption. So I think it's a really good point.
The thing we sorry, the thing with climate change as well is that it's really easy to get overwhelmed because pretty much everything we do has an impact on it, everything. So the thing that helps me cope with it is also to try to learn as much as I can about it, so I can understand where also my impact actually makes a big difference, so I can focus on the topics that I can have the most impact. Otherwise, you're going to be thinking about it all the time, and you're going to be feeling guilty for everything you do and for everything you purchase, and it's just not going to be productive, basically. So the way I cope with it is I try to be productive, and I think this also helps your mental health, if that makes any sense. Otherwise, it's really easy to get overwhelmed for sure.
All right, thank you. Let's take a next question here.
Yeah, hi. So the past year, most of the developers were kind of forced to work from home and basically not commute. Can you say what was the impact that this had? Like, is it meaningful, or that's just too small of a drop in the sea?
I can answer that if you want. We got the same question from the European Commission to tell them how much CO2 the European Commission saves by not traveling between Strasbourg and Brussels all the time, which in itself is already nuts if you think about it, that they keep switching places. And it depends on how you calculate it. There's people that say it's 99% of the CO2 you would have emitted of commuting you can save through video conferencing, but that's based on the assumption that the video conference basically has no CO2 attached to it, and that's a bit tricky. Again, it's a numbers problem. There is no definite answer to it. It's definitely better, but I think it's also better for the mental health of most software people. I like working from home, actually, so I don't know. But there is no reliable data. It's how you want to look at it, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
Cool.
We also don't have any data for it.
All right, let's take a question from there.
Okay, it's more like a comment and maybe some minor ideas. I'd like to hear what you say about that. But so first to my comment. Well, I guess it's cool that we're here and talk about it. But I get the impression that we are more celebrating that we're doing it instead of really noticing that we have to take actions. I heard something like, we can still do it, and I think we can't do it. We failed. Climate change is here, and we just can do small things to make it better, but every one of us has to take actions right now. And we can demand these actions from our employers and from ourselves. And we are here and producing a lot of waste. Like everything here is packaged in small plastic packages, and yeah, we still consume a lot of meat here, I noticed. And yeah, we just think we can do some things, but don't really acknowledge that we have an impact and we have to do something. And Fred, you already said that every action is a vote. I agree on that. So now my idea is to really demand on our employees to do something, to educate ourselves, to maybe realize what's behind meat and animal products and stuff like that. And maybe also to take a step, that's something I haven't heard, and I really liked your opinion on that, like on open source. Right now, when we are contributing to open source, any industry can use it. Can we make a license or maybe a commitment not to give our code to industries like animal industries, like war industries, like coal industries, so that we can stop that we no longer contribute to it. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, maybe I start. It's a great comment, and I mean, you touched on many points, so let me try to focus on one or two. Maybe the first, that every action you do is a choice. So whether you choose for your diet, or you choose for which packaging for your food, or to choose for your energy provider, it's what I also meant in the beginning with your mindset. If your mindset evolves around climate change and the climate crisis, you are aware of making and transferring this mindset to every aspect of your life. So I do fully agree with you that we don't do everything right, but I think that's a wrong approach. But it's also getting very philosophical here, and it's a very heated debate also, so I don't want to touch too much on it. And yeah, that would be my focus for your comment. Maybe I hand it over to someone else.
Yeah, thanks a lot for giving the comment. I think it's extremely relevant. I don't think our intention here is to celebrate what we're doing in our companies. There's nothing really to celebrate. The world is ending, right? And it's depressing. What we're doing here is just trying to use the space to bring awareness, but it doesn't mean that we're doing everything perfect here, because we're clearly not. But we can't have this binary approach to it. It's never going to be perfect. And even if you try to do everything, just the fact that you're living here in Berlin, that's my case, you're already contributing and you're already a big part of the problem. So yes, we have to call out all of these things like you just did. That was amazing. But we also have to accept the reality that, we're not going to get to perfect like this. And it's pretty hard to get this change to actually take place. So we also need to be a bit patient and just a bit more humble as well. And again, focus on the things that are actually going to have a meaningful impact. So how much of impact we would have removing all of the plastics from here based on the effort we would need to take in order to reach it. I don't know, but that's probably something else that we can focus on in the beginning. What I mean is just that it's really easy to point out all the wrong things we're doing and forget about the things we can try to do better. And I don't think it's productive, basically. So I try to just focus on having a very productive-oriented mindset to try to focus on the things that are actually going to make a difference, regardless of all of the imperfections we have, because they're going to be around for quite a while. About the other point you brought up, the open source, that's a very interesting one. So it's like, you can only use my library if you're vegan kind of thing. I love it, actually, to be honest. And yeah, I think it's something that maybe at some point is going to make sense. But again, how much of the impact this is actually going to have ultimately? Probably less than making sure we're voting to the right people and making sure we are doing our own all of the voting topics that I mentioned earlier. I don't want to repeat myself, but anyway, thanks again for bringing your point. I think it's really important to hear this voice here in this environment. And yeah, this is my response.
Yeah, I would only add, I love the idea of the open source license. I really like that. I think there's an important element that we don't talk about, that is the education that is needed to make all these choices, right? So you mentioned, like, you got to choose this, you got to choose that, you got to choose that. I think the majority of civilization on this planet doesn't have access to the information to actually make those choices. I'm very privileged. I'm a privileged white man, right, sitting on stage. So I can make a lot of choices. I can choose. I don't have a car. I only ride bicycles. I took the train here to come here from Amsterdam. There's a lot of choices that I can make. I choose not to eat the meat. Yes, but I've read hundreds of books on it. I have access to information. I have time. I have the liberty. I don't have to work 16 hours a day, right? So I can read in the evenings and things like this. And it boils down to a willingness to, first of all, learn and educate yourself about it. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And you have to have that time, and also educate others without saying, like, hey, you have to be vegan, but rather like, hey, look, these are the choices you can make.
Oh, super.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, guys. First of all, thanks for the talk. It was very interesting. So I will consider myself a self-advocate for cryptocurrencies. And it is funny that we have encountered some of the challenges that you were mentioning, like people thinking about profit and not really about the changes that actually we are trying to do, like changes on the problems that on the current financial system, about decentralization and so on and so forth. So my question is basically, well, you know, guys, that there has been some polemic about the environment in terms of mining and so on, but there's also some changes that have been happening on the cryptocurrencies with proof of stake and so on. So my question is basically, what are you guys standing about this kind of new emerging technology as is cryptocurrencies?
I always feel bad for the blockchain community because of that, right? There's Bitcoin, which is responsible for a lot of the, let's say, bad PR and proof of work, and there is a lot of potential. And I'm pro technology, so I think that technologies like the blockchain can do a lot of good. But I do want to point out that it is incredible the amount of energy, and actually the energy part we can even discuss, but the amount of electronic waste that comes out of Bitcoin mining specifically is incredible. They have to replace the miners every year, or sometimes every 6 months, and you literally cannot reuse them for anything else afterwards. And I think that is not okay. And I think in the time that we're living in, that cannot be okay. But again, I feel bad for the blockchain community because Bitcoin does not equal blockchain, and that's often what is the message that is coming across. So.
Yeah, I personally don't think I'm well enough informed to give you a proper opinion on the topic, but I do share the concern with the energy consumption because it's crazy when you look at the numbers. But I don't want to, yeah, it's just a little bit out of the scope of what I know, basically.
Maybe one take from my side because of what Max just mentioned, because we are having this discussion, you can see a shift in the community already, and which is like a good one, like going forward towards more energy aware energy consumption, so to say. But I'm also not qualified to really like give you an educated opinion about it. I'm not an expert about cryptocurrency either.
I think we have time for one question. I think you were first. Sorry, Danny.
Any questions?
So basically the question is, you were saying that it's important when you have an option to choose a company you're working for because this like also makes an impact. The question that I have is that we also distance ourselves from the company or corporations, which is very interesting for me because actually each of us is a part of that corporation and each of us work for that corporation. And while you can choose the good companies to work for, like there is a limit to that. And I think it's really important to basically start challenging the companies you're working for, and not only just like challenges those companies, but like asking questions. And I was wondering if there is some sort of a program or resource that it can be shared across like different IT companies or any other companies where we can educate ourselves what we can ask of our employees. Employers, sorry. That's like one question. And then also like overall the resources that we can educate ourselves, because as you were saying, like we are one of the most privileged people on this planet. We are highly educated, but there are a lot of people in the world which are not that educated. And I think it's our responsibility to share the knowledge in the best possible accessible way to them. So if we ourselves, we are not there yet, how can we bring the others there? So like how can we expect it from the others? So one favor is if you can also share maybe some of the resources that you think would be very valuable. Afterwards, yeah, thank you.
Oh, just maybe to rectify a bit of our messaging, like we don't really want to say, hey, quit your company, enjoy a company like us, you know, that's not the point. And yeah, because also being able to choose what company you work for, again, is a huge privilege that many of us have and not all of us have. So the idea is just to really bring the point that more and more opportunities like this are showing up. So just be aware, because it was something that at least me personally, I was not, it never really crossed my mind. So that was just trying to rectify my early point. Yeah, I love the idea of trying to come up with a way to somehow spread the word in a more easy way for people that maybe don't really have the interest because they lack the information to understand that how relevant this is. I honestly don't really have a good answer for this right now, but I think it's a great question to spend some time thinking about it. And I would be happy to share whatever I have and whatever I currently use as resources. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't have like a compiled list already for questions, but maybe we can connect later on so I can share some thoughts. I mean, the things were mentioned already, so ask about the tech stack that you have, ask about the business model behind, ask where the profit goes, maybe just asking these questions and maybe connect to colleagues and forming a union depending how big your company is. So I know there are also initiatives and union amongst really big corporations. So I think at Amazon, I've recently read in the news that there are some people unifying together and trying to fight their business model of like fast shipping things and throwing them away and not recycling them and not packaging them again. So there you have this power, and especially as developers, because you are the ones that are hard to replace, I would say, and have an impact if you say, okay, when you don't change this, I will quit my job if you go that far. So of course, if you have the choice. So I'm not pushing you in this direction, but raising the awareness, form some kind of initiative inside of your company and just exchange knowledge and reach out to people who might have the knowledge already is a starting point, and from that you can evolve. I would give you as a tip, and I can also refer to our blog, or we have a YouTube channel on Ecosia where we also touch on these kind of things. So we try to touch on also like forming global community or forming awareness for political decision making, but also for company models and business models. So we have some videos for it, and I can also share some materials later if we want to connect. So
yeah, I think maybe 3 small things very quick. There's a lot of that stuff on our website, of course, because that's what we do. We produce, unfortunately, a lot of paper, sdia.io. The second aspect, and this more advertising for somebody completely different, there's a great organization here in Berlin that they're now a global network. It's a non-profit, completely, also completely free for membership, called the Leaders for Climate Action, LFCA. And they're especially catered towards startups. More than 8,000 startups are members there, and they produce exactly this kind of pledge with a checklist. What can I do? What can I do in my office? What can I tell my boss? And they focus really on, let's say, that internal lobbying piece that is so important. And so maybe a good tip to look at what they're doing as well.
After that, I just need to add that Klima also has an amazing blog with lots of resources. You can take a look at it later. I can send you the link.
Thank you. We almost have enough time. Thank you for the question. What I would like to do, just give everybody 30 seconds to kind of wrap it up from your point of view. What is the last thing you want people to leave the room with in their mind? Let's start from Jörn.
Okay, I will just. I mean, it was a very interesting debate. It touched on many topics, and you see, it's a very complex world and a complex topic. I just want to probably rephrase my starting sentence also. It's all about your mindset. So if your mindset is right and it's evolving around the right topics, it will be helpful in many aspects of your life. And it will also make you feel better in many aspects of your life and make the right decisions. And yeah, that's it from my side.
I want to say thanks to the organization of the event to having the space. So super cool. I want to say thanks to Danny for inviting me to participate. You, Johanni, for volunteering to moderate. That was super cool. And thanks everyone for being here as well. If there's one thing I want everyone to leave here with, is that individual action is a thing, but that doesn't mean we're going to solve everything with individual action. It just means that it starts there. But it's important to be bold, call out, like it was done here. And even if we don't have yet quite a nice way to spread the word, just the fact that you're talking about these things at your job, it's already going to make a difference.
I can only agree, and also thank you for having me here as the only non-Android developer, I guess. I really appreciate that. I leave you with 2 sentences. Software has a footprint. I want you to all realize that, and you have all the power to make that, to change that. So just take up the power I would say.
Cool. That's a good way to end. Join me thanking the amazing panelists. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.